This presentation is brought to you by ADEQ's Drinking Water Inspection and Compliance Unit. It's going to go over regulatory documentation required at the time of inspection. We will start with a brief introduction of our inspection process. So who do we inspect? We only inspect public water systems, and these are systems with 15 service connections or systems serving an average of at least 25 people at least 60 days out of the year. So what does an inspection consist of? So sanitary survey or an inspection basically assesses a public water system's capability to supply safe drinking water. It's a comprehensive review of your system's components and records. For drinking water, we do 3 types of inspections. The first one is file reviews, which is a review of your files or records just from our office. The second one is unannounced sanitary surveys or unannounced inspections. So we'll just show up to your facility or to your site, or we can do announced sanitary surveys. Most of the time, we tend to do announced inspections. We will let you know that we'll be inspecting your system ahead of time and give you ample time to prepare. What is our inspection schedule? Basically, it depends on the type of system. So there are 3 types of public water systems. The first one is community. So community systems have at least 15 service connections used by year-round residents or regularly serve at least 25 year-round residents. Generally, these are your city water systems, town water systems, and such. So community water systems are inspected once every 3 years. The other types of systems are non-community water systems. These can either be non-transient non-community water systems or transient non-community water systems. So non-transient non-community water system is not a community water system, and it regularly serves at least 25 of the same people over 6 months out of the year. So usually these are workplaces or schools where people are using the water most of the time, but they don't necessarily live there. And lastly, transient non-community water systems. These are systems that do not regularly serve at least 25 of the same people over 6 months out of the year. So these are your gas stations, your rest stops, your restaurants and such, where people remain there just for a brief moment. They don't remain there for long periods of time. To briefly go over the basic setup of our drinking water inspection. So before the day of the inspection, we have a month-long process where we try to prepare you for the inspection and get all the paperwork squared away. On the day of the inspection, the ADEQ inspector will introduce himself or herself and go over your inspection rights. And we'll make you sign a notice of inspection rights form. Once that is done, we usually start with paperwork review. So we go over sampling plans, your data and maintenance records, and other documents that are relevant to your system. And then once that's done, we'll do a walk through your facility. So we will inspect all of your components, so wells, pumps, pressure tanks, surface water intakes, storage tanks, booster stations, and so on. And at the end, we'll discuss our findings with you and explain our follow-up process. So this presentation is going to focus on sampling plans required at the time of inspection. This is a list of the sampling plans required. So what is required really depends on the system type. So the first one is the lead and copper sampling plan. So this plan applies to community and non-transient, non-community water systems. To briefly go over the health effects of lead, lead is persistent and it can accumulate in your body over time. Young children, infants, and fetuses are particularly vulnerable to lead because the physical and behavior effects of lead occur at lower exposure levels in children than in adults. And in children, lead can cause impaired mental development, IQ deficits, low birth weight, shorter attention spans. And then for copper, some of the health effects, copper can cause stomach and intestinal distress. It can also cause complications if you have Wilson's disease. Wilson's disease is an inherited disorder in which excessive amounts of copper accumulate in your body, particularly in your liver, brain, and eyes. And also chronic exposure to copper can cause liver disease if you're predisposed to liver disease. So our lead and copper sampling plan looks like this. The purpose of the plan is to help identify sites that have lead pipes, copper pipes with lead solder, or are served by lead service lines. So the last page of the plan has a site selection guidance, so it will help you select your sites. For lead and copper, targeted sites are split into sampling tiers depending on the time frame of construction and materials used. So if you look at community water systems, it gives you 3 tiers. Tier 1 sites are single-family structures that contain copper pipes with lead solder installed after 1982, or contain lead pipes or are served by lead service lines. So if you're a community water system and you have Tier 1 sites, you are required to sample those sites. If you don't have enough Tier 1 sites to meet your sampling requirements, then you can look for a Tier 2 site. If you don't have a Tier 2 site, then you can look for a Tier 3 sites. And if you have an insufficient number of available tiered sampling sites, then you can use representative sites throughout your distribution system. Sometimes with homes built after the lead ban in 1986, these homes are less likely to have lead solder. So in those cases where you don't have any available tiered sampling sites, you can use representative sites throughout your distribution system. So to go to the first page of the plan, this is the first page of the plan. The first section goes over the basic system information, so the section over here. So just system name, ID number, population served, and so on. The next section asks for the number of samples you're required to take. So this section over here. So if your lead and copper sampling schedule is 5 samples every year, you just put 5 for the number of samples required. And then it then asks you for the number of samples submitted. So during your most recent sampling event, if you submitted 5 samples, you just put 5 samples for the number of samples submitted. Compliance with the lead and copper action levels is based on the 90th percentile lead and copper levels. So this means the concentration of lead and copper has to be less than the action level in 90% of the samples collected. The lead action level is 0.015 milligrams per liter, and the copper action level is 1.3 milligrams per liter. So this portion asks you to put the 90th percentile from your results for lead and then for copper. The 90th percentile is usually calculated for you by the lab, so it will be on your lab report or lab results. If not, you can calculate it yourself. The third section over here, you are not required to fill that part out unless you have exceeded an action level and are required to sample for water quality parameters. Then you would fill you fill this section up. So that completes the first page of the plan. The second page is this one. So this goes over information on your sampling sites. So you need to submit a page for each of your sampling sites. You only need to complete the top 3 lines, so location of the sampling site, so address of the site basically, the type of structure, is it a single family structure, is it a multi-family structure, is it a building, and so on, and the criteria or the plumbing material. So you can say it's a Tier 1 site, it's a Tier 2 site, Tier 3, or identify the plumbing material like copper pipes, PVC, galvanized, whatever it may be. And the rest of the page you actually do not need to complete unless you're changing sites. If you're changing sites, you would need to complete the full page. So what you would do is for the first 3 lines, put the information of your old site, so the location, structure, criteria, and then the next 3 lines you put the information on your new site. So just again, location, structure, and plumbing material. And then it asks you for the distance between the sites, so it's 100 feet apart, it's 200 feet apart, whatever it may be. And then it asks you for the reason for change. So why did you change your sites? You can say the house got demolished, I can no longer sample there, I moved the sample site to the next house over, whatever your reason may be, just explain it briefly over here. And then, of course, put your name, sign, and date. And that completes your lead and copper sample siting plan. And like I said, you need 1 page for each sampling. The next plan we will require systems to have on site is the revised total coliform microbiological sample siting plan, and this is your monthly total coliform. This is the plan for your monthly total coliform sample. So basically, the purpose of the plan is for you to have a written procedure to follow when you do your monthly coliform samples. But most importantly, if the normal sampler is unavailable and an employee or somebody from the system has to take the sample, they can use the plan. They can just pick up the plan and know exactly when and where to take the samples. So that's the use. And then for ADEQ, it just gives us documentation on how and where you're performing your RT-PCR samples, and we kind of make sure that your locations are suitable and are representative of your distribution system and the population served. So this is what our MSSP or microbiological sample setting plan looks like. To go over it step by step, the first part one, just goes over basic public water system information. So just the public water system name, the mailing address, the contact person, and such. It also asks for what type of system you are, so community, non-transient, non-community, transient. It asks for your population, the type of source you have, so groundwater, surface water, groundwater under the direct influence of surface water, or if you're purchasing water also. Or if you're selling water, that should be on there as well. And if you're disinfecting, it also asks for that. You can put none if you're not disinfecting, or choose the disinfectant that you're using. So that's the first part. The second part is information on your sampling sites. So your sample sites have to be representative of the water quality in the distribution system. So all your sampling sites have to be in the distribution system. So, for example, if you are required just to take one sample, you just have RT-PCR 001, 001 up, and 001 down on this plan. So RT-PCR 001 would be where you take your monthly samples, and then the up and downstream sample sites are your repeat sites. So that's where you would take repeat samples if you get a total coliform hit or a positive total coliform result. Usually monitoring takes place at customers' premises or dedicated sampling stations, or it can be other places as well. To go over the next part of the plan, it just asks you where your sample sites are located, and then if they're representative of the distribution system. So the requirement is that all your sampling sites are in the distribution system and are representative of the system. And then your repeat locations should be within 5 service connections of your original site, ideally. And then the second part just asks you how you're going to be conducting your routine and repeat sampling. So basically, you would just say routine samples are taken every month, or during the first week of each month, or during the first week, like the first Monday of the month, or whatever it may be. And then for your repeat samples, you are required to take them 24 hours, within 24 hours of notification from the lab of a positive result. So that's what you would put in the plan, just to explain that in the plan. The last page of the MSSP is this. So first, it just asks if you use surface water or groundwater, and if you're subject to the groundwater rule. So if you only use surface water sources, you're not subject to the groundwater rule, so you just click on that. If you are subject to the groundwater rule and are using groundwater sources, you just list all your groundwater sources under here. If you need more space, you can list them down here. And then it asks if you have 4-log. The groundwater rule only applies to groundwater sources that do not go through surface water treatment plants or that do not have approved 4-log inactivation. So if you don't meet that, it means you're subject to the groundwater rule. So you would explain how you're going to sample if you get a positive. So with the groundwater rule, if you have a routine sample if a routine sample is positive for total coliform, you take a raw water sample at each of your wells prior to chlorination and within 24 hours of notification from the lab. So that is what you would put in the sampling plan, and you put that over here. And then the last part just asks for a map of your system. So what we like to see usually with a map of your system, where are your system sources, like your wells, storage tank, your springs or surface water intakes, where they're located, your storage tanks we like on there, other important components we like on there. You can also put the system's main lights and then just an arrow showing how the water is flowing or the direction of the water flow. And then we would like to have all your sampling locations on the map. So your routine and then your repeat sampling locations on the map. So that kind of wraps up the microbiological sample setting plan. The next plan that we're going to go over is the disinfection byproduct sampling plan. So to start with, we'll just start with how DBPs are formed, and this is very just high level, very simple explanation. So when chlorine reacts with organic matter, it produces disinfection byproducts, and then time, temperature, and pH can affect the concentration. So some of the health effects of DBPs or disinfection byproducts, they can cause cancer. They can affect your reproductive system or cause reproductive problems, and they can also damage your kidney or blood. So who samples for disinfection byproducts? So community water systems, non-transient, non-community water systems, and consecutive systems that either add or deliver water that is regularly treated with a primary or residual disinfectant have to sample for DBPs. So if you're a consecutive system and the system you're buying water from chlorinates, then regularly treats its water with primary or residual disinfectant, then you'll be required to sample for DBPs. Disinfecting only in response to a total coliform hit does not count, so you don't have to sample for DBPs if you're only chlorinating in response to a total coliform sample as opposed to regularly. So when and where do you sample? So basically, systems are required to sample according to an approved Stage 2 compliance monitoring plan. So this plan is a little bit different than the other ones because you have to have an approved plan to sample. So how are your sampling locations and then your monitoring month chosen? Sampling locations are based on just hotspots that were identified during Stage 1 testing. So where you had your highest results during Stage 1 testing, that's where you probably would be sampling. And your monitoring month is based on the month of highest DBP concentration. So based on your historical data, where you had your highest DBP concentration, that month is when you're going to sample. If you don't have any historical data but need to pick sites, you can use some of these characteristics. So for TTHMs, you would sample near the end of the distribution system before the last group of customers, where you have either non-existent or low disinfectant residuals. That's a good location. Where you have increased residence time or downstream of storage facilities is also a good location. And in mixing zones where different sources are combining in the distribution system is a good location as well. For HA5s, it's pretty similar. So same thing near the end of the distribution system, but before the last group of customers. You'd also sample mixing zones or downstream of storage facilities where you have increased residence time. With HA5s, they biodegrade when disinfectant levels are low or non-existent. So you want to sample areas of low but existing disinfectant residual levels. So those are some characteristics you can use to choose sites. This is what our compliance monitoring plan summary sheet looks like. So basically, it'll have over here in purple, we'll just have your monitoring month. Here just tells you if you're doing monitoring once a year or quarterly, or if you're on increased monitoring or routine monitoring. And here we'll have your sample location. And then this part in green would tell us if you're doing individual samples, meaning either TTHM or HA5, or if you're doing dual samples. So this both at the same site, TTHM and HA5 at the same location. So this is what the summary plan looks like. This part over here is an email or letter that we'll send you. This is what our approval looks like for the Stage 2 plan. So it'll just tell you when it was approved, what we based it on, what results we based it on, and then just go over what your schedule will be. So beginning in 2017, this is where you're sampling, what location, during what month, and list everything out. So this is what the approval letter looks like, and that's what we'd like to see on site for inspection. One thing that I want to mention again, if you are changing sites, you have to have approval from ADEQ. So you just contact your compliance assistance coordinator and then go from there if changes need to be made. If you change your sites without letting us know and sample there, it might end up in a mismonitoring violation. So keep that in mind. So that kind of wraps up the stage 2 DBP plan. The next plan and the last plan that we like to see on site is the emergency operations plan. So for this plan, only community water systems are required to have it. However, we do encourage other systems, non-community systems, to also develop one. You have to keep the plan in an easily accessible location, and the plan has to meet requirements of the Arizona Administrative Code. And basically, the purpose of the plan is to outline the steps that a community water system will take to assure continuation of service in different emergency situations. So the sections or the items that you're required to have an emergency operations plan are listed in rule, so, and then are listed over here. So some of the things you have to cover, you have to address loss of source, loss of water supply due to major component failure, damage to power water supply or loss of power, contamination. So basically you have to explain what you're going to do in each of these emergency situations. So collapse of a reservoir, breaking your distribution line, chemical and microbiological contamination of the water supply. So you just go explain and then list out the steps that you will take to fix the situation. The emergency operations plan also has to address provisions of alternate sources of water during an emergency, how you're going to notify regulatory agencies, news medias, your consumers. Also, it asks you to identify any critical components that should remain in service or should be returned to service quickly. If you have any critical spare parts, it just asks you to have an inventory in there, and then also explain how staff is trained in emergency response procedures. So that's basically the emergency operations plan. We do have a template on our website, and this is kind of what it looks like. Our template does list out all the requirements of the rule, so it's kind of, if you use the template, it's easier to meet all the requirements of the Arizona Administrative Code. And that's basically it for this presentation. If you have any questions or need more information on any of these plans, you can go to our website, adeq.gov. And thank you for listening.